season 1, the fact that we got 16 episodes to tell the story was the key. You need enough time to tell what this tale is in the first book. So that was the most important thing. And the rest is just a matter of execution, because we have the story, we have the characters. Adaptation is a different discipline than creating a series from scratch. So you're exercising a different muscle as you're sitting in the writer's room and you're putting the story up on the board. It's like, here is the book version of this story. Okay, how do we divide this up into 16 hours? What's the beginning, middle, and ends of each individual episode? What's this episode about in particular? How do we structure this? Do we take that scene? There are scenes that are really memorable in the book that fans go, oh yeah, I love that moment. And then you look at the actual book and it might be only half a page, but it's a really memorable thing. So then we say, well, can we expand that? Let's play that even bigger. Let's embroider around the edges of it and get to that moment that everyone's looking for. So it's a different task. You're trying to be. Our job is to be as faithful to the book as we can. That's something Starz said to us directly. Chris Albrecht read the book himself, which is who does that?
Unheard of.
I know. It's like, and he said to me, he said, we believe in the book, trust the book, make the show for the fans. And just trust that anyone who's not read the book will be swept up in the story like everybody else. So that was great, and I just said, perfect. So now we know what we're doing. Our job is to go and realize the material. It's not to reinvent the material. It's not to do a new version of it. It's to do this material. What's the best visual version of Outlander can we produce? I mean, I love history, and I love historical fiction, and I think that there's actually a pretty wide crossover between genre fans, and they're almost all historians. I mean, I found this over and over again. Star Trek fans, Battlestar fans, you start talking to any of them at an event like this, and sure enough, they'll all know a lot about history. And so I think there's it's not as big a leap as you might think it is. Right. There's a lot of people that just love sci-fi who just are fascinated with various different cultures, because the past is an alien world in a lot of ways, and so much of science fiction is basically riffing on old cultures that Battlestar was using a lot of tropes from the past, so did Star Trek. So it really wasn't that big of a stretch for me, and I was attracted to it just because it's a good story. I mean, I read the book. It was a page turner, and I was compelled, and I was drawn into it, and I just thought, I like this, I want to see this, I'd like to write these things. I mean, I think this is a fairly straight narrative. It's Game of Thrones is a very successful show, obviously, but it's a very complex show. It's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of different storylines, a lot of characters and kingdoms, and a whole bunch of complicated material. This is a single narrative, and I don't think there's anyone who won't be able to follow the story. And I just think it's an engaging story. I don't think you need to have read the books to be engaged by the story of Claire. What happens to this woman in this world that she finds herself in. I don't think those are mutually exclusive things in this case.
Yeah. No, it's fairly simple. The books encompass so many different genres that it's often difficult for me to explain, well, what kind of book is this, because it's not a kind of book, it's, a story. And so I've found that the only way of selling the book to someone is either to give them free samples, essentially, little snippets, which I've done for years and years, or to just begin telling them the story. In 1946, a British ex-combat nurse named Claire Randall goes to the Scottish Highlands on a second honeymoon. She and her husband have been separated by the war for 6 years. They're getting reacquainted, thinking of starting a family. While they're there, though, she goes out walking by herself one day in the woods, finds a circle of standing stones, and as she walks through the circle, she disappears back into 1743. Where the first person she meets is a man in an 18th century army officer's uniform who looks just like her husband and turns out to be his 6 times great-grandfather. Unfortunately, he also turns out to be a sadistic bisexual pervert, and while trying to get away from him, she falls into the hands of a gang of Scots who are also trying to get away from him for other reasons. Well, finding an English woman wandering around the countryside in what looks to them like her underwear. She's wearing a 1940s house dress. They scoop her up and take her to their castle to find out who and what she is. Well, the bad Captain Randall, her husband's ancestor, is also very interested in finding out who and what she is. And in the fullness of time, she's forced to marry one of the young clansmen to avoid being handed over to Captain Randall. So she's trying to escape from the Scots, get back to the Standing Stone Circle, and her husband of the 18th century. She's being pursued by Blackjack Randall, and she's falling in love with the young man that she's been obliged to marry. The story unrolls from there.
There you go.
Yeah.
What's that?
And I said, no, it's a different skill set. I'm a novelist. You know, when I work, it's completely solitary. It's all mine. I have total control over what goes into it and out of it. Script writing is much more a communal affair. It's very interactive. It evolves throughout, all the way up through the shooting. In fact, which I know, I have friends who are script writers and I've talked to them many times. I said, you know, I'm not adapted to working that way. I won't be able probably to keep to the right timetable, you know, be responsive and, you know, always on demand. And the other thing is that I have books to write. You know, I can't spare large chunks of my life to be totally involved in something like that.